Hey everyone, welcome to Gamer Thoughts. Today we're talking about the golden age of gaming. So, the golden age of gaming, what exactly is it? You've heard this phrase thrown around, you've heard people mention it when it comes to different genres, different consoles, different franchises, but it's kind of this ambiguous thing. So I want to start off with what I'm talking about when I mention the golden age of gaming and who this video is directed towards. So the Oxford definition of a golden age, an idyllic, often imaginary, past time of peace, prosperity, and happiness, or a period when a specific art, skill, or activity is at its peak. So that specific idea that something was at its peak, it happened in the past, and it was the best that it ever was, and things will just never be as good again. And this video particularly is directed at the people who have that view of the golden age of video games, that it's something that happened in the past, video games are not fun anymore, and that they'll never be as good as they once were. If you're someone who still has a blast playing video games, still looks forward to things that are coming out, still enjoys yourself when you hop on the couch and boot up your console or sit down at your PC to play something, this video may not necessarily be something for you. However, I do hope you stick around and listen to what I have to say. So there's a few things I want to talk about in the concept of the golden age of gaming. The first is I want to talk about how it is an imaginary concept and it is something that we create within our own heads, and why it's personal for everybody in their own way. I also want to talk about why we don't talk about the golden age today and why it is always considered a past concept and something that is always behind us. I want to talk about why the concept of a golden age is harmful and why I'm making this video and what personal biases do to us in our ability to enjoy gaming. And lastly, I want to talk about if there truly is a golden age and what I think that is. So firstly, is the golden age as we create it in our head an imaginary idea? When looking at that definition, it does mention that the golden age is often imaginary. And I would like to propose that when it comes to gaming, this is very much so the case for most of us. The golden age is something that we create in our own heads. The thing about looking to the past and saying something was a golden age for something is we often view it with rose-tinted glasses. And I want to specify, I'm not talking about viewing something with nostalgia. I think nostalgia is a good thing, and when harnessed, can give us a lot of joy. However, I do think we look at things in a way that were better than they actually were. So when we look back at any period of gaming, one of the biggest things that we do in our heads to make it look better than it necessarily was we cherry pick our favorite titles from that era, whether it be for a particular console, a particular genre, or a particular year. We will go through and go, oh, well, the SNES was the best time of gaming because of this game, this game, this game, this game. And we'll pull up really incredible titles that existed and ignore a lot of the bloatware that came out during those eras. That's not to say that those amazing games weren't good. I absolutely love titles from every single era of gaming. However, it is a false narrative to say that only good titles were released back then. Another thing when we look at past eras of gaming is we tend to push this idea that it was the only time when games were released in a complete form without glitches or without issues. Now, the thing about this is if you dig into old games, this just isn't true. There were many games, some of my favorites, that were released either in an incomplete state or were released with glitches that, if you dig into the speedrunning community, for example, are widely used and widely known to get through games faster. Had developers had the ability to, I fully believe that in the 90s and the early 2000s, the concept of a day one patch would have existed. And as people found glitches in games, corporations would be patching those out. Another thing that we do with those older games is we're much more forgiving of their flaws. There are lots of people that you will often hear the phrase, "Oh, I understand that the controls might be a little messed up in this game, but I love it anyway." Whereas today, if a game had an issue with a controller scheme, we would just flat out say this game's unplayable and drop it. Things like the camera controls of the N64. A lot of people will talk about how those camera controls were really revolutionary and a huge deal in the transition to 3D. And I'm not arguing that point. I think they absolutely were, and they were incredible for their time. But when you try to go back and play Zelda Ocarina of Time and have to hit Z target every time you want to turn your camera forward versus, say, Zelda Breath of the Wild, where you have a 2 joystick setup to move your camera freely, one is definitely superior to the other. So there's a combination of a bit of a revisionist mindset in our head where we say things were only great in the past and we forgive the flaws that we do remember, to create this idea of a golden age where everything was good, and even if something was bad, it was totally fine. The next thing that I'd like to tackle is why we are unfair to modern gaming and what makes it feel different. There's a couple pieces to the way we treat games today that we didn't do 20, 30 years ago. A big one is the financial factor of gaming. The financials of gaming hasn't actually changed all that much in the last 30 years. It's very easy to find old ads of games that came out on the Super Nintendo or the PlayStation 1 or the PS2 and find that those games were about $60 to $50 upon release, pretty close to today's 60 or 70. However, our financial situations as gamers has completely changed. And this is something that has to be acknowledged when looking at the way we view games today. Unless you are in your 50s, when we look back to the early 2000s or the 90s as an era of gaming, it is very unlikely that you ever had to make the decision of, should I buy this video game or should I pay my rent? Should I buy this video game or should I make sure that my kids have food on the table? An unfortunate piece of reality is that our financial decisions are very stressful in the modern age. We have a lot on our plates and a lot that we need to cover, and gaming is a hobby. Even if you are in a position where you're making good money, you don't necessarily have kids, you don't have other people to take care of, your financial situation is very different from someone in the early 2000s, late 90s. Many of us can remember either for ourselves or for someone that we knew. In my case, it was my brother. He worked for a summer, saved up money, and the first thing he did when he got paid was we went to Walmart and he bought a PS2 bundle. There were zero thoughts of what else that money could go to. It was, we're buying a PS2 that comes with Kingdom Hearts, Final Fantasy X, and I think Gran Turismo were the 3 games that came in the bundle. And we were stoked. We played those games to death. We absolutely loved it. There was never a thought in our mind of the financial ramifications. Whereas today, because our financial lives are so stressed, we put all sorts of limitations on what we expect to get from a video game for our money. One of the most common ones I hear is an hours to dollar ratio. A lot of people say they want to get 1 hour of playtime per dollar spent. But even within that ratio, if we apply it to the golden age of gaming, that late 90s, early 2000s, almost the entirety of the SNES catalog would not be worth the cost of the game. There are very few games on the SNES that within a singular playthrough, you can get 65 hours of playtime, which was the general cost of an SNES game. Even within the PS1 and the PS2 era, there's very few games that you're going to get 50 hours of playtime out of, which was the general cost for those disc-based games. The way we look at the cost of games and how we compare them and find their value and say what is worth buying and what is worth playing is wildly different today than we did when we were younger and we could just spend our money how we wanted to. And that mindset, that expectation has a huge impact on the way we view the modern state of gaming and if it's good or not. Another piece of the puzzle that makes gaming feel weird today, as opposed to what people say is the golden age of gaming, is the social stress and the social environment that we're in when it comes to games today. Now, you may be thinking to yourself in this moment, oh, well, I don't participate in a lot of the social discussion around gaming. If you're watching this video, you are someone who takes part in the social discussion of gaming, at least a little bit, because you're online looking up stuff about games. And when you get involved in that online discussion of gaming, it is absolutely exhausting. Whether you like a game or dislike a game, you are constantly bombarded with the counter opinion, whether you want it or not. And those counter opinions and those discussions create this constant race of you have to be spending your time optimally when it comes to gaming, that if you are not playing the absolute best thing, you're wasting your time. And the way we determine what is the best thing within that social environment gets skewed by a number of factors. A game could sell more copies than any other during a specific year, but not be dubbed Game of the Year at a particular award show, and that will affect our view of that game. Even outside of just whether or not a game is good or bad, we have these large social discussions about whether or not we should be playing certain games and controversies that surround them and which companies we're allowed to support and which titles we're allowed to support. And while I do believe many of these discussions are valuable and should be happening, we cannot dismiss the effect they have on us mentally when we go about trying to enjoy a video game. This is something that in the early 2000s, late 90s, we didn't experience in the same way. A lot of our social interactions about a game would be with our close friends, and we were just stoked to share games with each other and play with each other. Or we would go to the game store and maybe flip through a magazine if you were lucky enough to actually get the magazines. Unless you had the rad job of working in a video game store, it was very likely that you had limited access to social interaction around video games. To be put simply, your life is very different today than it was 20 or 30 years ago when it comes to video games. And your outside life and your outside perception of where video games fits into it has a major effect on your enjoyment of video games. By this point in this video, you may be asking yourself, Blitz, why are you taking this away from me? Why are you trying to ruin my memories of my childhood? And why are you trying to destroy the golden age of gaming for me? Now, I don't want to tell you that you're not allowed to have a favorite era of gaming. I don't want to tell you that you shouldn't have fond memories of the past. These are good things. Particularly though, the concept of the golden age of gaming is harming your enjoyment of modern gaming. By merely having the concept of a golden age in your head, you have a built-in expectation and bias towards everything that comes after that. When we talked about the definition of the golden age earlier, we talked about it being a period where a specified art, skill, or activity is at its peak. That implication that things are as good as they were ever going to be and it will never be that good again. Oftentimes you'll hear someone say the phrase of something like, I had no expectations going into this game and it still disappointed me. What often we fail to acknowledge when we say a sentiment like that is that we have built-in expectations based on all the experiences we've had up to that point in our life, particularly expectations about the golden age of gaming. When we take one period of gaming and elevate it above all others and say, that's as good as it's ever going to be, of course we're going to be disappointed with everything that comes out after it. And when we do enjoy something that comes out, we treat it like this rare thing that shouldn't have happened. We see it quite frequently when a game is successful. You'll see a flock of posts online of people saying, this is what happens when companies finally care enough to put out a decent game. And it's been so long since a game had me feeling this way. That hasn't happened in forever, even though we may have had that experience 5-6 times in the last year. In our minds, having an idea of the golden age is this built-in expectation that games just won't be good, and if they are, it's a fluke. I have a good friend who often says comparison is the thief of joy, and by creating the golden age in our heads, we are constantly comparing everything that we interact with to an unbeatable standard. Simply put, I believe that if we don't hold modern releases this pedestal that we've created in our heads that is the golden age of gaming, we will find more enjoyment in all of our gaming endeavors. So the last thing I'd like to tackle is the golden age of gaming something that exists for me? What is my personal opinion on the golden age of gaming? And the simple answer is, I believe we are currently living in it. No, I do not think that the current 5 years or 10 years of gaming is the golden age of gaming. I think we have compartmentalized gaming into too many small eras. I think from the beginning of the NES to today and going for a little while longer, we are in the golden age of gaming. There's a few reasons I think this. The first one that I will say is that gaming is bigger than ever. There are more gamers, there are more ways to play games, there are more ways to get access to games than ever before. There are more studios, there are more people involved in making games. There are more tools to create games. People can pick up and make a video game all by themselves these days, and it's not limited to 3 or 4 major studios that have access to the technology. We can create video games on our own computers. Another thing to note is all of those old eras of gaming that we talk about as the golden age are not this magically lost thing that we cannot access. We have more access to video games than ever before. While it may be expensive if you want to play on original hardware, or there may be some issues with certain ROMs and emulation, there are very few games that are truly lost media in the current day and age. The personal access to be able to game is at an all-time high. We are able to pull out our phones of our pockets and experience anything PS1 era and before. While we may have this desire to compartmentalize these different eras of gaming, those eras never truly ended. We still have access and we still have the ability to experience all those things. And retro gaming, the early 2000s, late 90s, are still a major part of gaming today. And with that incredible access that we have to those games, I would like to propose the idea of what I call the unbroken line of quality gaming. I believe you can look back at any year from this year to the year that the NES was launched, and you can find at least 12 games that are worth playing. That number specifically I chose because that's about a game a month, which is what most gamers could justify either financially or from a time commitment. Yes, there are people who can beat 50 games a year. Those are by far outliers from what most modern gamers are able to do. And if you doubt this idea that there are that many games to play, I would like to ask you to look at your backlog. Put simply, look at your backlog and ask yourself how many great games are sitting on that list that you haven't gotten to touch yet. I know very few gamers who have a crisp, absolutely clean backlog where they say, oh, I have nothing left that I want to play. Constantly, we are bombarded by great releases that we don't have time for, that get stuck in our backlog. And this has been happening for years. The best days of gaming are not behind us. We truly live in an absolutely wonderful time for gaming where things are bigger and better than ever. We have access to literally anything that we want, and we don't have enough time to enjoy all of it. So my final thoughts on this idea, the golden age of gaming, and how do we get ourselves out of the mindset of the best days of gaming being behind us and allow ourselves to enjoy modern gaming. Well, the first step I would say is, one, give yourself that permission. Flat out say to yourself, I want to enjoy modern gaming. You may think this is a simple step, but a lot of people don't do it. A lot of people will actively choose in their head not to enjoy gaming in its current state. The other thing I'd like to do is issue a challenge to you to play a game on your own as you would have 20, 30 years ago. Pick a game from your backlog or pick a game that is an upcoming release. Don't worry about talking to people about it. Don't worry about looking up reviews. Don't look up what other people are saying. Just pick a game that you're interested in and sit down and experience it. And don't take that game and compare it to everything that's come before. Play that game for what it is and what it's trying to be. I think when you do this, you'll find that there are still great games out there and you have lots to still experience. Don't gaslight yourself into thinking the best days of gaming are behind us. And that's been Gamer Thoughts today. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. I can already hear the people who are telling me that I'm absolutely insane for thinking this. But I hope you understood the message that I was trying to get across. If you enjoy gaming content, remember to like and subscribe. As always, much love.